Good morning, good afternoon to some people, good evening to others. My name is Konstantin Makris, and I'm going to be presenting the Evolve Security Intro to Cyber Threat Hunting. Right now, I'm looking at the participant list, and it looks like we have 32 attendees, so that's amazing. Really excited to spend the next couple hours with you guys. As you can see, we have a Zoom webinar platform. So this provides a couple means of communicating back and forth. Because there are so many participants, it's probably not going to be open chat, but we can enable attendees to ask questions. There's a answer functionality. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. It'll say Q&A, I believe. And then also there's a chat function. I'll bring that into the window. What you probably want to do is switch to all panelists and attendees. If you just want to speak with the panelists, you can select that, and that can go directly to myself. And if you have comments, questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. Okay, so this is the chat box, and you'll be able to select the chat and go to, again, all panelists and attendees or just panelists. So right now I put 22 in there. That's a mistake. So feel free to test that out. I'll be keeping track of that. I looked over the roster of people that were joining, and I'm so impressed and humbled with the attendees here. I'm excited to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about threat hunting, as well as to learn from what all the professionals in this room are doing. I think that as a basis, this is a difficult topic only because a lot of people don't really understand the difference between threat hunting and incident response, or what's a SOC and what's threat hunting. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What I've aimed to do is we're titling this Intro to Threat Hunting. So I'm trying to canvas from a very high level strategic kind of conversation that's going to be more focused on the CISO level, the management level, how you kind of build a threat hunting program, and then kind of move down from there into kind of some operational tools that you can use. I'm trying to stick with open platforms, open source tools, stuff that's easily available, free. So I'll be referencing some GitHub pages, some GitHub tools. I have some demos planned. So we'll be working through a lot of that stuff. And then also getting down to the usage of some of those tools. I'm going to touch on them and leave it to you guys to kind of play around a little bit more. If it looks like it's getting hot, I am in the attic of a house built in the 1850s, so it does tend to get a little hot up here. But so right now, feel free to get comfortable. I'm going to be putting a poll out here. Will you be getting the slide deck at the end of the session? I believe that will be made available, and I think that will be able to send out a link to the slide deck. And I believe there is a recording going on right now. So for people that are, I saw we had some European people attending, so it's getting a little bit late, or will be getting a little bit late. The later, it gets, feel free to drop off, and the recording will be made available. Thank you for the question, and that seems to be working well. On the same note, I'm launching a poll that allows people to pretty much give me an idea of what level you guys are at. If you're hands-on keyboard, tactical, practitioner, if you're somewhere that's working, management strategy, or you're somewhere in the middle. See some replies coming in here. So I'm not sure if this is live for you guys, but I can pull it up here and we can see. And these are these are anonymous. So as we move on to like, what level do you think you guys are? It is anonymous. So I'm seeing that we have a pretty good mix of people. So that's great. Really excited to kind of move the discussion into the areas that fit kind of the composition of the group. So without further ado, a little bit about me. My name's Konstantin. I go by Dean Makris. I live in Connecticut. I work my day job at the United States Coast Guard Academy as an instructor of cyber systems. I teach pretty much the technical aspects of the cyber systems major, develop curriculum with them. I've been there for about a year, and I also continue work as a consultant and incident responder, and still are in the Navy as a reservist. I've served multiple roles in that position. From there, I've been in everything from, again, kind of that strategic level, advising flag officers as to how to understand risk, all the way down to working and developing tools, techniques, and procedures. So I have a little bit of experience with the Navy. I've done consulting, incident response as a consultant, and now, what they say, those who can do, which is what you guys are, and those who can't teach. So we are, moving towards that. Go Bears! Thank you. Yes, for the Coast Guard. And if you are interested, I did graduate my undergraduate from the United States Merchant Marine Academy. So go Salty the Sea Eagle in that case. So Bears and Salty. So if there's any questions for me, background, I started my career as a merchant mariner for almost a decade. I sailed commercially. I have a pretty strong background in operational technology. So I kind of joked that in the early 2000s, I was maritime cybersecurity before there was maritime cybersecurity. And now there's a new focus on critical infrastructure and security. So one of my projects with the Coast Guard is working to develop kind of that operational technology curriculum and training platforms, both for the fleet and for the academy. So my pivot now is moving less towards small, medium-sized business threat hunting, incident response, and more towards that operational technology platform. That's enough about me. If you guys have any specific questions, my contact information is in the slide. There's not too many Constantine Macroses, so you should be able to find me. Feel free to reach out. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm very interested to, again, keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in industry. I feel like that's something that makes me useful. That is, I guess, a good background on me. I live a pretty boring life here in little podunk town in Connecticut. Starting out, we're going to talk about kind of some of the challenges of security and what, when we start moving into threat hunting, what the challenges are. So I'm going to have some questions on kind of where we feel our organizations are kind of in this kind of maturity construct, and then where does threat hunting actually fit in? What is threat hunting? We're going to move into that. What is threat hunting? And then kind of that conversation of, is this something we should be doing? Is this something that our organization should be doing? And if we're not doing, we're negligent. And then from there, we're going to start again, kind of come into that big funnel of like strategic thinking, and then start moving down into more of the operational and tactical. So what do we hunt for? How do we hunt? And then kind of culminate and bring it all together. So what is threat hunting? We talked about kind of this idea that it's not reactive, it's proactive. A human being is going to develop a theory, a hypothesis that will lead us to, essentially take some sort of action to find out if this is actually valid or not. That idea of a proactive mindset means that, every day you have to be developing these hypotheses and running them to ground. So with that in mind, we need to essentially be able to utilize the tools at our disposal, and some of those are going to be in place already. Like a lot of these, people that are 20 plus probably have most of the tools for threat hunting already in their environment right now, right? And it's just kind of how we are going to approach it, right? Like how are we going to differ from the SOC? Well, we're going to differ from the SOC because we're going to adopt this proactive mindset. We're going to be looking versus waiting, right? We're going to be making sure that, essentially, like, assuming that our preventative tech, we're going to say preventative technologies, we're going to batch all of the things that we already have, our firewalls, our antivirus, our intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, host-based, and network, that all of that is preventative technology. That's all stuff essentially that is already being monitored. And what we're going to do is we're going to look and try to find out where those themes are, right? And where we can essentially inject ourselves with an idea, right? So all you need to really do is start is an idea. And those ideas, we're going to talk about how to develop those theories, those hypotheses. And you got to find this kind of, rub area And once you find that rub area, you're going to go and run it to ground. And you may find out that, it's a vulnerability that's open. You may find out that it's a vulnerability that's being exploited, and you may find out that your hypothesis is maybe just not valid, and that you need to work on developing a better hypothesis moving forward. When we're talking about the targeted use of technology as well, I guess the question, and this might have been a good poll, but the question often that I get is, well, what's the difference between threat hunting and incident response, right? Because I've gone to organizations, they're like, well, we'd like you to do threat hunting. And I'm like, no, no, you have a breach. You need to do incident response now. They're like, no, no, we need to do threat hunting. And I'm like, okay. So, and then again, same organization, every time I we got into a situation where it's like there's really, we just need to kind of prove out a couple hypotheses. There was another analyst that was like, no, no, this isn't threat hunting. We don't know threat hunting. This question of like what is threat hunting, it's a circle, right? Like it's like on some sides everyone thinks that we need to be doing, this thing that is threat hunting, which actually it isn't. And on the other side, there are, professionals that are like, no, 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 it's not. And some people think, what I think the next slide is what is threat and what isn't. But the important thing is that, we have it here, hypothesis driven, but we want to be able to develop measurable goals. So with anything that we're doing, we talk about kind of, the idea that we're going to be developing some value from this, right? You're going to be asking people to spend time, energy, some sort of capital, whether it's human capital, monetary, emotional capital, right? Like we're investing in this effort. We need to have some sort of measurable goal, some sort of metric that we can come back and say. And those metrics are not necessarily we found a bad guy. It may be that we found a bad guy. It may be that we found another thing to check. Maybe that we found something that we didn't know we were going to find, right? Something that possibly could be a future exploit that we can then pass over to the teams that can remediate it. So it's not a sprint, right? It's not a thing that you do for a day and go back and do it another day in 2 months, right? It's a marathon. It's a continuum. So think of it as a continuum, right? You're building off of it's a knowledge base, it's a process, it's a lifestyle, right? And to do that, to make it valuable, you need to set measurable goals, and you need to be able to essentially, once you've created the value, you need to be okay, not necessarily getting stuck in every rabbit hole. You need to, once you've gotten an answer that's good enough, I've seen this a lot where we keep running down the rabbit hole and we miss, the obvious in the, pursuit of something that is, never going to happen. We want to look at it, our hypotheses through a risk lens as well. And we want to try to then make those items that we're searching for, those hypotheses we're developing, the best bang for your buck for the organization. So, we want to be maintaining a proactive mindset. We want to be able to, have targeted application of technologies, right? We want to utilize technology as a force multiplier because you're going to usually have a smaller threat hunting team. It's not going to be like an entire SOC. You're going to have probably, when you're starting to compose a team of threat hunters, you're going to want people that are, familiar with vulnerabilities, people that are able to go through and pick out specifics from things like threat reports, develop theories. Intelligence officers and services tend to be good threat hunters because they want to essentially investigate. So you kind of need this investigation mindset. You're not setting up like an instant response team where you need like a malware analyst, an analyst, and your Windows guy, your Linux guy, your reversing guy, right? It's more like you're setting up like a detective team, and they need to be technical. Clearly, they need to understand how the systems work, but you want to be able to utilize technology to allow them to be a force multiplier. Usually that means utilizing APIs. So if you have an EDR solution, you usually have everything you need to start specific targeted hunts. It enables people, but then again, you also need to make sure that that targeted application of technology is not you stomping around. All too often, we've seen the incident response teams, and these are, let's say, contracted teams, not teams. Again, I haven't been involved in many teams that were internal, just based on my history, but I've come in many times where I'm the contracted incident response team and watched as the team will deploy an agent will alert the adversary to their presence, tip their hat as it were. And then you have a bigger problem because the adversary looks at this. You got to think, again, a proactive mindset. You also need to look at the mindset of the adversaries. And gone are the days where your adversaries are all 13-year-old people in their basements with eating Cheetos of their parents' house. You're dealing with a plethora of different organizations, from criminal organizations to nation states to hacktivist groups. And with that, you need to understand that they all are like you, right? Like every in a way, they are all like you, in that they are waking up in the morning. They're going to do whatever their job might be, right? Whether it's going to like Dr. Evil's lair to do nefarious things, they still, have some sort of family of some sort, someone they care about. They all have a mother or a father, right? Like someone that they care about, aunt, uncle, who knows? But you need to understand that they do get on these same cycles. So, like, if you're an adversary, a criminal organization, someone, right, and you've put a lot of investment into breaking into this organization and being super quiet, and then all of a sudden, someone thinks you're there, and you get spooked, and you think that investment that you've spent like months and months and months, like trying to prep, and like now you've got lateral movement, you're gonna like sell this for $200,000 so someone else can ransom them, right? Like if you think that that's all going down the drain, what are you gonna do? We'll go to the next one. No, they're gonna stick it to you. They're gonna bring it back. It's the same thing. They're trying to protect their investment. So if you go around and you stomp around with technology, doing stuff that's not within your normal TTPs, right? So we talked about adversary TTPs. You think about your TTPs, and if you're doing things that are outside of your TTPs, right? Then that's going to seem like not a normal day. And what do you think the adversary might do on not a normal day? They're going to do whatever it is that brings them closer to their objective, whether that's exfilling your data, whether that's ransomware, whether it's whatever it is, right? Whether it's, essentially just taking the credentials that they need, whatever it might be, they're going to execute that if they think that their investment is compromised at that point. So it's like the stock market, right? If you think that the stock's going to go down, right, you're going to lose value. What do you want to do? You want to get out. You don't want to wait till it's at the bottom. You'd rather get out when it's going down than sit there and wait for it to be valueless, right? And you get nothing. So think about it from, again, proactive mindset. Targeted use of technology uses a force multiplier, but not necessarily, the idea that you're going to be tipping your hat and stomping around. And then also set up, this hypothesis-driven measurable goals. So we talk about this, the incident response cycle, and by the definition, and if you look at the cycle, it is reactive, right? Like we all know this cycle. We've all been trained in it, right? It looked like we had a couple, like GCFAs, stuff like that, GCIH, whatever the incident handler one is, right? We know this, right? SANS teaches it. Everyone teaches this incident response. We prep, we detect, we identify, we skip containment, we go to recovery, we skip eradication, we go right to recovery, we skip lessons learned, we go back, we detect the next, right? So we know the cycle, right? We know where we make mistakes, we play whack-a-mole, so on and so forth. This is waiting for a fire alarm, right? Like most of these processes are kicked off by what? We're kicked off here, right? With detection. So as we move from detection identification, we are essentially moving through this incident response model, and we start off being reactive. So we are already behind the eight ball, right? Like something has already happened to trigger this event. It's like waiting for the castle to be attacked to start your defense, right? Like instead of, you see all these military movies, again, I can't help using the military analogies, where, you see people that are just like, not even prepped for an attack, and it all goes badly, right? But you see people that are prepping, and the spies go in, spies come out, and like they try to burn all the food, right? Like the trees, all that stuff, right? Cut down all the trees. You want to be proactive. As we move to kind of the idea of this threat hunting model, this is I don't believe this is doctrinal. This is something that has been developed over time for me individually, where people will develop a hypothesis, you'll start running that to ground, you're going to discover something, right? You're going to discover either something you intended to or something you didn't intend to, right? Something you expected or something you didn't expect, and then you're going to essentially improve that. And then the next day you wake up, or the next week or the next month or whatever. You wake up, you have a new hypothesis. So you essentially, if prior was waiting for a fire alarm, right, where we are essentially a fire department waiting there till fire starts, this would be like getting in front of it, like passing fire codes, right? Like we want to get ahead of the problem. So in this case, we're thinking, huh, could they do this? Could we be vulnerable to this? Like a lot of times we've talked about like heartbleed and all these other shell shock, all these things, and we patch for them. But like, do we follow up and like be like, could this happen? Could something else happen? Like, could we pivot from this to something else? And it's not necessarily a pen test. It's more that you're looking for the fact that something might be there, right? You're looking for what that is that you could discover. You're not looking to with the end goal of penetrate. You're looking at to see what is it that we're looking. So this cycle, it's quite a bit shorter, clearly, and it's quite a bit simpler. Again, non-doctrinal, but it gives us kind of this basis for having some sort of system that we can start working within. And the goal is really here, right? You're responsible for developing here, but really the goal is just improving, right? And that's really what we can hope for with a threat hunting team is to go beyond basic cyber hygiene, go beyond what everyone else is doing, right? Because your security, even with that EDR solution, is only as good as what everyone else knows, right? If you are an outlier or if that EDR is not set up to detect X, Y, or Z, that's where you get a hypothesis. You're like, can we do it? Like, is it a thing? Is it a thing that we would be vulnerable to? Is it a thing that is already being exploited? Will this show up? Will it show up in logs? And you develop these hypotheses, and you can spend most of your time investigating, and you usually do a lot of write-ups, and and this is how you're on your way to be a security researcher there, and it seems overwhelming at first, but you just start with one thing, and through this, you're going to learn about how a lot of these things operate. So you're going to be proactively analyzing, right? You're going to be trying to identify network breaches that you didn't hear, right? Like right now your organization, this would be a good poll, right? Are you in New York City or are you in Wyoming, right, for the light thing? Like, can you hear all the signal that might be in the noise? And that's the question here. So you're getting close to the top of the hour. I think we're almost done with this section. So threat hunting is not, right? So we talked about kind of like this very fuzzy idea of what threat hunting is, that it's a proactive mindset, that it's hypothesis driven, that it's focused on improvement of the organization. What is threat hunting not, right? It's not a solution. A lot of times we as a community have defined threat hunting as what the solution providers are telling us it is. So if we think about that for a minute, our CrowdStrike guys tell us that CrowdStrike is threat hunting. Our Carbon Black guys, our you know Palo Alto guys, whatever it is, right? They're telling us what threat hunting is and what it should be. It's not though a solution, right? It's not a box that you can buy. It's not a thing you can turn on, right? It's not a set it and forget it solution. It's not a check against reputation data, right? We'll talk a little bit about reputation data. It's kind of this broad brushstroke term that I use for kind of like the knowns, right? Like all of the things that we know are reputation data. It's not a essentially just someone dipping in and saying, "Hey, we're just going to look at this today," right? It's not ad hoc. It's not like you know Joe analyst saying, "I'm going to do some threat hunting today." Why? Because it's a quiet day in the summer, right? Like it's not this ad hoc approach. It's a systematic investment. It's also not necessarily a little asterisk here. Should put an asterisk here. It's not necessarily deep system forensics. Now that comes with the asterisk in that when you're investigating a hypothesis, it may include that. And there's some really, I mean, this is a space that's very, very interesting because you've got so much that you can dig into and tools that, I mean, just released yesterday, Microsoft released, a memory analysis tool for Linux. Anyone know about that? Ping me in the chat if you read that one. I'll try to get the link for that during a break and put it in the chat there. But it looks like a pretty. I mean, I was like, I need to pull a memory image and see. I got a couple servers. I want to check into those, right? So it's not deep forensics, but it might involve, a lot of that forensicator, mindset of, being an investigator and digging until you actually get to the end, right? And there is always kind of an end. It's made for Linux VMs, Andrew, and it appears it's also made for, this is the Microsoft portal. It's a free to use tool. They developed it so they could do essentially like use it to send memory images from, I think, memory images and hard drive images. I think I have, again, I opened the link up this morning and I looked at the article briefly, but yeah, it's made for generally for their Azure instance so that they can essentially keep their Linux images free of rootkits and hiding and such. So threat hunting is not these things with the asterisk around deep system forensics. And I would never tell someone not to jump in and look at some network logs whenever they have the time. But we don't want to call that threat hunting. We want to call that ad hoc log traffic analysis or ad hoc endpoint analysis, right? Probably because it was triggered by an amount of time that is available, not based on a hypothesis that was developed before. So again, the idea of threat hunting is that it could be a hypothesis that was based, but you have a team, you have individuals, you have dedicated resources, whether it's like a split resource where you spend half your time this, half your time that, doing that sort of thing. Okay, so why? So again, we're moving from kind of the strategic, high level cloud view all the way down. We're not down yet, right? This is the kind of the, comma, we're ending strategic talking. When we start talking about why we're doing it, how are we going to sell this thing, right? So you have, the idea that we are supporting the business, right? And if we are at the point where our organization is mature enough to start investing energy into threat hunting, then it makes sense because it supports the business. It's a business enabler. It is like an insurance policy, right? Like we insure our homes against, like, so I say cyber, I'm like an advisor for a startup for cyber insurance. And so everyone's like, well, it's against the risk of the unknown. I'm like, no, you do some certain things, it's not unknown anymore. It's you're gonna get hosed at a certain point. Like it's just when, not if, right? But our home insurance, right? Like we're protecting ourselves with flood insurance when we live in a place that's not a flood area against something that we're assuming and we protect it against, like really doesn't really happen, right? Like that's the idea of insurance is like it's that anomalous activity that we need to protect ourselves in. So like the idea of having a threat hunting group as a form of insurance because it's going to find the things we don't know about, right? It's going to find those anomalies. Like we've already done the preventive, we've done all the things to not have our house be flooded, right? Like we've built it on high land, right? We're not on stilts on the ocean, right? Like people get insurance there too, but like who knows? Like I live in an old house, the old Yankees, in Connecticut, they built the houses like up on the hills where there was water, right? There's all this coastline, all this beautiful coastline in Connecticut. Never build houses there. You're not going to see a house from 1850, 1700 right on the water. It just doesn't happen, right? Get wiped away by a hurricane, get flooded out, right? There's no water. So, in other words, we did all the right stuff. We did our basic cyber hygiene. We built on somewhat high ground. We still want to have some sort of insurance to protect us against the unknown. And those unknowns are what you get that for. Like that's why you have threat hunting teams, so that you can cover those areas that are unknowns, right? So you're using it as a way to hedge your organizational risk. It helps meet compliance requirements because as you get these compliance requirements, you're going to have these new theories that are developed on where you could find, risk, and you'll be able to actually more accurately measure and understand risk with a threat hunting team because you will understand more of the problem and how it pertains to your organization, right? Controls like your NIST controls, your ISO controls, your PCI controls, all of those, you can chalk those up to best practice, right? When they talk about, organization A will administer controls based on XYZ, right? Like those variables are the ones your threat hunting team helps you understand. They help you understand, the probability of something happening, right? We talk about probabilistic interpretation of how something could happen. Like how difficult would this be? Is this actually happening? You get answers. That's the idea. Just like forensics, you're getting answers with your threat hunting team. You might be required to do threat hunting because of SLAs. You might be in a position where you're in a high risk scenario. You know that you're going to be got. You think you're going to get got, and you want to make sure you're not getting got, right? And then, you also want to make sure that you have that kind of visibility and awareness of what's going on when, right? You want to get beyond preventative into predictive. So we use a lot of the same tools, right? So we see the right side, left side, whatever the mirror images are, and we see instant response, and we see threat hunting, and we see that a lot of these things are the same, right? Intelligence, right? Global trends, organizational risk, known targets, right? And the difference being you're waiting for alerts and you're essentially developing hunts, right? So a hunt is going to be triggered by the theory, and we've again beat this into the ground based on a theory, based on a hypothesis. And their scope and timeliness changes, right? Instant response needs to be able to respond. They need to be able to act quickly. They need to be able to essentially respond accordingly. And there's a certain cadence to that, and there's a certain discipline to that. You don't want your instant response team going off researching something for 3 weeks while the adversary is exfiltrating data, and you know that's happening, right? Like you'd rather have the investigation and like kind of hypothesis and the scoping over here before you know that something's happening. You know it's happening. You need to deal with it. And that's what this is good for, right? You same inputs, right? Different output, right? Your inputs are very similar, right? So here you're analyzing global trends. Here you're validating, right? Global trends. These are things you can search for, right? That are part of your EDR, they're part of your firewall, they're part of XYZ that you're using as your tooling, right? Here, you're reading them and you're almost reading between the lines too, right? So again, very fine line. It's more based on, the scope, the technique, and the timeliness, right? Like so your scope and your timeliness are the two biggies.